Yeah, I don't know what to tell you. I still can't find my camera. But anyway, on with the show. Hello all my Kenvians, I'm Papa Ken, and welcome to a brand new episode of Discovering Doctor Who. Today is episode 80, and I'm going to be covering the episode simply titled, Hide. Now, one thing I will say is, I'm not a huge fan of the title of the episode per se. I mean, it is very simple, and it does hit on a few, kind of key notes in a way, but overall I feel like they could have come up with something a lot more creative in the end. But I'm not going to talk about the title. What I'm going to talk about right now is my favorite parts of the episode, and once again, since I'm recording with my phone, I'll be referencing the computer over here. So, number one favorite part of this episode is the ghost and the classic horror elements that were a part of this episode. I really did enjoy that aspect. I thought, especially in the first half of this episode, that they did an excellent job of building the tension, building the mystery, and just giving us this excellently done, again in my opinion, just classic horror experience. No blood and guts, just a very strongly done ghost house story. It's like better than... Well, I don't know if it's better than how some previous episodes have done, but I mean, I thought it was pretty well executed overall. And the ghost itself, although I'll talk about what it's revealed as in a little bit, the images of the ghost, like the pictures that we see, where it's like the stretched out eyes and the big gaping mouth, when I was watching the episode, I was legitimately creeped out. Like, that was just a amazingly done, perfectly established image. Like, it gave me legitimate chills. And the fact that, up until we learn what it actually is, the fact that it just kind of keeps changing a little bit. The face is always the same, but, like, its position keeps changing a little bit over time was just, it was so well done. So yeah, that's definitely just a major favorite part about this episode for me. And just so you know, I'm a big fan of like horror movies and scary movies and such, so that's, big props for this episode by itself. Now, on to number two favorite part of the episode, which is, or rather are, Alec Palmer and Emma Grayling. Now, while the characters themselves were, they were okay, I feel like the actors that played them just did an excellent job of portraying these, side characters, these characters that have not existed before in the series and most likely will not exist again. Well, not exist isn't the right word, but they most likely won't appear again. And yet, they were able to portray them in a way that made me care about them, that made me, concerned about their well-being, to want to know more about them, to enjoy the story of their romance as it blossoms, so to speak. And, finding out in the end that they actually do get together and that the, trapped person in time was their granddaughter, which again, or great-granddaughter, which I'll touch on here in a little bit again. But yeah, I found them to be really well done. Even if the characters themselves weren't written that well, the portrayals, the acting really brought the characters to life and made me care about them more than I expected. So yeah, props to them. Now moving on to number three, favorite part of this episode, Clara and the Tardis. And two scenes to be specific. First would be just the scenes where Clara is in the TARDIS and it's actually flying. It's like, she basically sort of talks the TARDIS, I guess, into helping her save the Doctor. Those scenes I thought were a lot of fun just because of how absolutely maddeningly chaotic it is inside the TARDIS when it's only Clara in there. I found that really enjoyable. But most importantly, the scene where it's essentially Clara talking to herself, only it's the TARDIS taking on, her image, which I can't remember the exact phrasing, but, it took on the image of someone that she held in high regard, which which was really funny. And I guess it's sort of also indicative of possibly one of the reasons why people tend to not care for Clara so much. And in a way, this episode was poking fun at that. Was she's kind of a bit too perfect. And one thing I will say, although I am enjoying her as a companion, there's no real arc to her so far. There hasn't really been much there hasn't been much more development of her character. That's the word I was trying to think of, development. There hasn't been more development of her character other than just us finding about the origin of how she came to be through that little snippet with her parents and the leaf. So yeah, the fact that, apparently Clara holds herself in such high regard, she sees herself as, so perfect. I don't know, maybe I'm overthinking that or I'm just talking gibberish, but I did just really enjoy that, found it funny. And, yeah, it was a good couple of scenes there with Clara and the Tardis. Now, my fourth and final favorite part of this episode, some nice alliteration there, is the Crooked Man. Now, this is another thing that I'll actually touch on again in a little bit, but for me, the way that they did the Crooked Man rode this line between seeming a bit a bit too CGI and perfectly creepy. Now let me explain. There were scenes where I don't know if it was the creepy man or the Crooked Man or his love interest, whatever. But in the house, like those scenes where we see in the hallway, and like down the hallway, we just see the figure twisting and writhing down the hallway. Those scenes were other ones. It's just like the classic horror elements just creeping in, and it was so well done. And then when we get to the portion where the doctor and I don't even remember her name, the other character, are in that forest with the Crooked Man, and he's not as intimidating overall when you get to see it in the light, or low light, whatever. But I feel like what they did with the character was just because of how it moved. I know that certain movies have done this before, is where it's basically they'll get a contortionist, so to speak, and they will have the person walk backwards through a scene, or basically they'll act backwards, and they'll be twisting and writhing, and then what we actually see, in the show is that footage in reverse. So it causes this, already, the twisting to be that much more unworldly. And I honestly love that trick, and it can actually make a scene seem more CGI than it actually is. So, that's why I say it rides that line between perfectly creepy and a bit too CGI, because I honestly can't tell. I don't have a good eye for graphics. I can tell if I like something or not, but as far as being able to differentiate between reality and computer graphics, I'm not that great at times. But yeah, the Crooked Man was my fourth favorite part of this episode. Now, moving on to my annoyances with this episode, there are only two. But for me, they were actually fairly significant. And fairly simple overall. The first annoyance that I had is that the episode has what I call, essentially, horror movie ending syndrome. And it's one of those things where so many horror movies start out strong, start out really good, and then from it's usually right around the third act, things really start going downhill, and they never pick up. And I feel like that's kind of what happened to this episode. It started to move away more from the horror. As the science fiction aspect started to come in, their handling of it was questionable, to say the least. They focused more on the romance between Alec and Emma, which that in and of itself isn't a bad thing, but I don't know, it's like we had a complete tone shift, and it just made maybe the last third, or maybe even the second half of this episode overall just kind of weak, and that was disappointing, because again, it started with such strong horror elements, some really effective aspects that I really enjoyed, but then as we approached the end, it just felt kind of meh, I guess you could say. But yeah, I mean, you could call that a nitpick if you want, but it really brought down the tone of the episode for me, unfortunately. But before I dwell on that much more, talk about my second and final annoyance with the episode, which was, it's a love story? Really? Really? It's... And, I get it. It's like we have a love story. We have Alec and Emma, and finding out that the ghostly image all along was actually their great-granddaughter, trapped in a pocket time universe or whatever. That was strange. That was really weird. But, in the end, for me, that's kind of forgivable, if a bit, hokey. But a love story between the crooked man and apparently the crooked woman, which is his mate, that is stuck in the house. It's like, I don't know. I feel like, from my perspective, that entire time, what we saw in the house was an image of the crooked man. Just sort of like splitting through into the real world, not being able to be there completely physically, but we can see its image. But then, I don't know, it was just making it, go from a complete horror story with a love story inside of it to actually being a love story all along. It's that's so much of a stretch. It's just absolutely ridiculous. And honestly, just kind of unforgivable. I don't know whose idea it was to go that direction. Maybe it was just the writer of the episode. Maybe it was some influence from Moffat. I don't know, but really both of those kind of converge into one. Just the whole ending between the overall fairly kind of mishandled sci-fi elements overdoing the horror elements, and the whole crooked man, crooked woman love story. It was a bad ending. It was a happy ending, obviously, but it was just not well executed. Once again, that horror movie ending syndrome, so to speak. So, before I move on, as always, let me know some of your favorite parts of the episode, some of the things that annoyed you, and I'm going to keep pressuring it, even if you hate these episodes, even if you hate the episodes of Season 7. Leave something positive. Think of one thing positive about the episode, because I will not accept that no one can find a single thing positive about this episode. I will simply not accept that, no matter what. And if you don't like Clara, think of something nice to say about Clara. You can do it. I know you can. I know you can. Alright, anyway, moving on. It is time for the track of the episode, or it would be if I actually had one. There was one single song for this episode, one track for this episode, and it's called I Am a Ghost. And I listened to it, and it's fine. It sounds fine. But it's not really worth mentioning. Like, the best I can say about the track is that it sounds like it could be a part of the Resident Evil 2 soundtrack, which is a game I love. I absolutely love Resident Evil 2 back on the PlayStation. But other than just being some ambient music for a video game in my mind, it doesn't... And this episode, obviously... It's not really worth mentioning, so unfortunately this episode, I can't really say it has a track. The music and ambient noise of the episode was well done, just the track isn't really noteworthy, so unfortunately no track of the episode this time. Now, sorry I skipped over here a little bit. Here we go. Time for the quote of the episode, and this is another weird one! Now the episode did admittedly have some pretty clever, lines here or there. There's one that stood out the most to me, and it's for a very strange reason, and some of you might have an idea of what I'm talking about before I even mention it. But the quote of the episode is this. And it's a conversation between the Doctor and Clara. And ignorance is, what's the opposite of bliss? Carlisle? Yes, Carlisle. Ignorance is Carlisle. What? Now, I Googled, I went onto Google and I searched what Carlisle was, and it made no sense. This quote baffles me. It made me laugh. It made me laugh because of how strange it was and how I figured, oh, well, it must be something that I suppose you need to be from the UK from the UK to understand. Which I figured would mean it would be easy enough to just go on to Google and figure out what it means, but apparently not. There were a few kind of ideas, but none of them really made sense. So if any of you out there know or can properly explain what, ignorance is Carlisle means to me, please do explain, because it's way over my head apparently. So yeah, that's the quote of the episode for a very strange reason, but do I really need a good reason at this point? Alright, now moving on. Now while my theory of who and what Clara is has not changed any, however, it basically is confirmed in this episode that this Clara is the original, because of, basically, the Doctor took them there so that Emma, who is an empath, which is something I forgot to mention earlier. I really like that part about her about her character, is that she's an empathetic psychic, or an empath, as they said over and over again, and I've repeated several times. It's like in order to get a read on Clara, to find out what is different about her. But according to Emma, she's just a normal girl. So in my mind, that confirms that this Clara is the original. And I'm interested to see where it goes from there. Now, moving on. Well, I was going to do one thing, but I'm going to talk about my overall thoughts on the episode first. As for my overall feelings on this episode, it hurts a lot because I really, again, enjoyed the horror elements of this episode. I liked the way that the ghost was done at first. And it had some really good other aspects as well. But in the end, just the second half or the last third of the episode, really, it weakened over time. It fell into that movie ending syndrome, or horror movie ending syndrome. And then the hokey love story at the end, which, that's not a huge impact on the episode itself. It's just kind of like leaves a bad taste in your mouth at the end, because you're just like, really? That's how we're ending this episode? So yeah, okay. I liked it. I did like it. But, I won't be, I don't think I can revisit it. Maybe I'll revisit the first half again sometime. But it's this weird mix of like and dislike, I guess. Yeah. But, alright, so moving on to what I was going to do before my overall thoughts. Time to start a new little sequence here on the show, where I'm going to be reading a poem from this book, An Eloquence of Time and Space, by James Wylder. And this is a book that I got from Console Room 2015, the Doctor Who con here in the Twin Cities, or, well, more specifically in Minneapolis. And one of the books that I got from him is this book that contains poems that are inspired by the different episodes of Doctor Who, up through, I believe it's up through Season 8, or maybe it's to Season 8, I'm not completely sure. But I'm going to read the poem about... I'm going to read the poem inspired by today's episode, Hyde, and it is thus. Romeo and Julie-ahhhh! What are you keeping from me? Past the glasses and the lost medallions, I see the way you see me, like I was millennia away from every shell and shot and bloody mess, and the screams at night that keep you shattered, and I wait. This machine, I think it's broken, to see back, to catch a glimpse, to mark the depth the spirits sank, to run my hands through death and pick out the cracks in its skulls. Too long the circuits crumble, and I see the break in the system reflected in the screen. Now I'll put the text for the poem down in the description, because, the way you read it might be different than the way I read it, which, a lot of these are really interesting. I really wish that I could talk to James after reading these to just get a complete feel for what exactly he was feeling when he wrote these, because again, they're inspired by the episodes, but certain parts of it are lost on me. But I'm hoping as I read more of this book and I get to see more of these episodes that more of these poems will come to mean just as much to me as the episodes themselves, potentially. Yeah. Anyway, all right. But anyway, again, thank you very much to James Wylder for giving me permission to use the poems in his book. I'm really looking forward to doing more of those in the future. Again, I'll put the text for the poem down there. Camera fell. Anyway, thank you very much to James for letting me, or giving me permission to use his poems in upcoming episodes. I'm really looking forward to that. But anyway, time to end the episode. Everyone, as always, let me know your thoughts on the episode overall, the things you loved, the things you hated. If there was a track that wasn't listed on the official soundtrack, let me know if there was anything that stood out to you, or any other quotes, really. I'm looking forward to hearing what you all have to say. But coming up next, we have Journey to the Center of the Tardis, and I'm really looking forward to talking about that one. I'm looking forward to writing out my thoughts and getting that one to you all. But, as always, everyone, I will see you next time on the next Discovering Doctor Who. And until then, Alonzi!